MashaAllah. Okay. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to send his peace and blessings upon Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his family, his companions, and all of the successive generations from the time of the Prophet up into the present who have held on to this tradition. So alhamdulillah, this is the first installment of our weekly program, Lowering the Waterline. So we're just going to go over a basic introduction to what Lowering the Waterline is about, and then also some ground rules before handing it over to Sheikh Farhan to begin. So alhamdulillah, we're part of history right now, y'all. This is the first episode. So right now, alhamdulillah, Sheikh Farhan is doing some programming after Maghrib. He's gonna be joining us, and I feel that it will be more personable if we can cut on our cameras when he come on to show him that we're here, so he can put a face to the name, and it makes things a little bit more interactive, especially from the perspective of the speaker, inshallah. But for me, you can keep the cameras off. You know what I'm saying? We just warming up, inshallah. So to begin, what is lowering the waterline? Well, it's a concept that I've learned at one of my trainings. And the concept of it is looking at the depth of our reality as a person, and how oftentimes when people see us, we often give what can be defined as an artificial scope of who we are. And so the analogy of the below the waterline is there's an analogy of an iceberg, and that we see what's at the top of the iceberg, but below the iceberg, below the waterline, there's a lot more of that reality of that iceberg. There's far more of it below the waterline than it is above the waterline. So the goal with this program is that hopefully, inshallah, we'll be able to go beneath the surface and to create a strong, lasting relationship with one another in a way that's not artificial, in a way that is full of substance. And so the structure of this particular gathering is more of like a gathering where we discuss things, as opposed to being a lecture where someone just tells you what you need to hear. So we want people to be interactive, which is why we put everyone as a panelist, so that everyone has the capacity, inshallah, to speak, as well as to turn on their video cameras. And once again, as we said earlier, when Sheikh Farhan comes on, please, if you can, cut on your camera, just so he can put a face to the people in the room, and it makes it feel a little bit more personable, so we can benefit, inshallah. So now let's dive into community agreements or ground rules. I'm gonna, inshallah, list 4 of them, and inshallah, after I list 4 of them, I'll open it up for you all to add something to the community agreements or ground rules. The first one is, number 1, everyone has value. What this means is that every single one of you is an expert of sorts. You have a plethora of experiences and things that happen in your life that the rest of us will benefit from you sharing. And so do not feel like you just have to listen. We want to hear from everyone. Everyone has value. The next one is, what would Prophet Muhammad do? What would Prophet Muhammad do? Now, how this manifests itself in this particular gathering, imagine the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, being committed to the tradition, meaning that the Prophet did not change the tradition to please people, but also the Prophet ﷺ exhibited compassion. So he was committed to the tradition, and he was compassionate with people that he interacted with. So if we hear something that we don't like, or someone says something, or we find that we might want to correct someone on something, let's be mindful of that when we're interacting, so that we are, 1, embodying the commitment that the Prophet ﷺ had towards the tradition, but then 2, embodying compassion. The third one, we usually say Vegas rules, But because this is going to be broadcasted, at least the first session, I will say skillful disclosure. So normally in the ideal world, and inshallah in the near future, we'll meet in person. And when we meet in person, we will be able to, when we meet in person, we'll be able to, drink coffee and tea together and all those things. And we can have more of an intimate setting. But because we don't know how many people might be listening to this particular session, we want to call upon skillful disclosure, which essentially means be tactful in sharing things about yourself. Because even though we want to lower the waterline and dive deep, we want to be mindful of the fact that we don't know who's listening to this discussion, and so be mindful of that when you're sharing pieces of yourself. And last and not least, before I pass it to Sheikh Farhan, for the fourth community agreement, I would say we are all struggling in our own way. We are all struggling in our own way. And essentially what I mean by that is that we are all at different places. We all have different perspectives. We all have different shortcomings. And so to be mindful of that when we are interacting in this discussion, hopefully that will tell your own truth. Okay. So with that being said, we went over everyone has value. What would Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam do? Skillful disclosure. I didn't type it correctly. We are struggling in our own way. And 5, that it looked like Sheikh Farhan added to the list. Tell your own truth. Is there anything else we would like to add to this before we begin? Okay, alhamdulillah. No pressure. With that, without further ado, we'll introduce Sheikh Farhan, and let's do it. Bismillah. And like I said, if you can, please turn on your cameras. It makes things, a little bit more personable. If you can. And I don't want you to feel like you're pressured, you know what I'm saying? What? Allah Akbar. My man. Okay, I see you, bro. I didn't know who that was. I was like, what? Okay, I see you. Okay, that's Bismillah. Sheikh Farhan.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. So today inshallah we're going to be talking about forgiveness, and this is a bit of a convoluted issue, and you'll find that there are a number of speakers, and there are a number of khatibs, and even a number of scholars who present this issue, and they kind of use it in a spiritual blackmail type of way, where we all feel like we are pressured to forgive anybody who has wronged us. But we have to understand that forgiveness is a process. It's not a switch. And this is something that's very important to keep in mind. We can't always turn our internal switch on. It's also very important for us to differentiate between what it means to forgive someone in terms of holding them legally accountable and holding them accountable in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we'll talk about some of these issues, and we'll delve into some of these issues inshallah as we continue on, because there is something that is very important to keep in mind when we talk about the issue of forgiveness, is that it involves emotions, and emotions are extremely complicated. Everybody has an individual experience. There's no real way to gauge how we feel when we've been wronged, or many times if we've been wronged. So something to take away, again, that's very important to understand, is that there's no wrong emotion, right? The way that I react internally is completely acceptable, and sometimes we might feel internally that it's inappropriate. If somebody passes away, maybe inside I feel happy, or I might feel sad, or I might feel joyful, right? And there's no wrong reaction internally. There's only wrong actions, and this is what we find in many of the verses that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about how an individual reacts, and how the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam described particular situations. And forgiveness is something that is really deep. It has to be something that is very internal. It is something that is very personal, and it is something that really affects our hearts. And you'll find, as you go through, or as any of us go through our lives, that in forgiveness there is a relief, right? There definitely is relief there, but there are situations where we have to understand, because it's really easy for us to be like, ya akhi, ya ukhti, you should forgive him, or you should forgive her, because they wronged you. Well, there are situations where people have been raped. There are situations where people get killed, right? There are situations where people, everything is taken from them or everything is stolen from them, and all of a sudden that conversation doesn't become so easy. And it's very important to understand that a wrong that has been done to me or a wrong that has been done to you is always going to be very subjective, right? Whatever affects us and whatever affects me as an individual, it can seem sometimes petty to me, or it can seem petty to you, but it's not necessarily petty to that person. And like I said, sometimes that forgiveness is a process, and we have to make sure that we are utilizing that process and we're going through that process in the correct way without hurting others. Because as we get toward the end of the discussion, it is something that I will talk about and something that I will discuss, in that sometimes we use forgiveness as a way to oppress others, right? And sometimes we forget that part of the equation. And I think that's a really important part of the discussion as well. Forgiveness is something that we all share in. There's never been a person in a situation where he is consistently at the top or he's consistently, below. He's always being oppressed or he's always the oppressor. It is always going to be a subjective position, right? There are going to be situations where we are the oppressors, and there are situations where we're going to be the oppressed. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has always put that balance in our lives in terms of qabd wal bast, meaning that there are times where he gives and there are times where he takes away. And during the times of giving, we should always be preparing ourselves for that time where those things are taken away from us. And this is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually promises us in his statement, where he says, وَلُنَبْلُوَنَّكُمْ بِشَيْءٍ مِّنَ الْخَوْفِ وَالْجُوعِ وَنَقْصٍ مِّنَ الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَنفُسِ وَالثَّمَرَاتِ وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ, where he says, we shall certainly test you with fear, hunger, loss of property, lives, and crops, but give good news to those who are steadfast, or those who show sabr. So sometimes this idea of sabr and this idea of afu, this idea of forgiveness, they can become very difficult. They can become very convoluted depending on how they're presented, and sometimes they're misconstrued. And it's very important for us to have a good grasp and a good understanding of them. So here we have a hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he says, "If any servant who suffers a calamity says, 'We belong to Allah; to Him we shall return,' Allah reward me for my affliction and give me something better than it in exchange for it. Allah will give him a reward for his affliction and would give him something better than it in exchange." And I understand a lot of these have to do with loss, but the reason that I mention a lot of these verses is that loss is sometimes caused by other people. That loss is sometimes caused by other individuals. And many times we are on the receiving end. So even though we're not able to take our rights back from that person, it's very important to understand that we still have a choice of, number one, having sabr, having steadfastness, and secondly, being forgiving. So these two things, many times they go hand in hand, even though they don't always do that, right? There are things that are completely out of our control, natural disasters, accidents, and there are a number of things where it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who actually removes those things or takes away those things for us. I mean, there are a number of people, who just lost their jobs because of the situation that's going on. People who had invested heavily in the stock market, they're taking big hits right now. People who are investing in commercial buildings, so their retail sector is doing very well, but the commercial sector isn't doing so well. So there are some people who are benefiting and there are some people who are losing. And it's very important for us to keep in mind that sometimes there are individuals who are the middlemen, right? Who are involved in these situations. And it is not exclusively a relationship or a natural disaster or an accident per se. We have another hadith that where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he saw his son Ibrahim taking his last breath, and he began crying. So Abdurrahman ibn Auf, he asked him, he said, "Ya Rasulullah, even you?" And he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, "Ya ibn Auf, this is mercy, hadi rahmah." Then he wept more and said, "The eyes shed tears and the heart is grieved, but we will not say except what pleases our Lord Ibrahim. We are grieved by your separation." So again, this situation where we have death, where we have accidents, where we have natural disasters, these are very specific cases and very clear cases are where we're supposed to show sabr, where we show steadfastness, versus how to deal with forgiveness. And there are a number of other cases, the hadith of the woman whose son passed away and she didn't know the Prophet ﷺ was the one who was telling her to keep an awareness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there are even more situations of where he sallallahu alayhi wasallam dealt with sadness. The year that his wife Khadija died is the same year that his uncle Abu Talib died. All of Quraysh had placed a trade embargo on them on that same year, and it was actually known as Amr Husn, the year of sorrow. So all of these things, how did the Prophet ﷺ deal with those particular situations? So the fact that the Quraysh, for example, they put the trade embargo on him and anybody who who helped the Muslims, how did he deal with that? He sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he dealt with it in a very steadfast manner, steadfastful manner. He didn't, there was no military response at the time because they weren't in a position to do so. So what he did is, he waited until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allowed them and gave them the opportunity to make, to migrate. And there were actually 3 migrations, right? There are 3 migrations that happened during this time period so that the Muslims would be able to escape that oppression. So when it comes to dealing with other people, it becomes very challenging now on how I deal with this person in front of me, because we have so many verses that talk about the one who forgives, is better, and how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will raise the rank of that person who forgives. So what I want to talk about is how we differentiate between these types of forgiveness. So the forgiveness that we have is in a legal context, and there's a forgiveness in a spiritual context. And I think these 2 things are very important to keep in mind. Meaning that if someone, for example, I get into an accident with someone, and it's that person's fault, and he hits me now, and I get out of my car, obviously I'm going to be upset that my car has been damaged. And so now I stand in front of this person. How do I deal with that situation now? Because there are many times there's anger, right? There's frustration. There are a number of things that begin boiling up inside. Now, how do I deal with this person in front of me? Does it mean that now I don't get the authorities involved? Does it mean that now I should just walk away? Or does there have to be a sense of accountability? And really, this depends on the individual, right? It's not something that I can actually dictate to you. So are there people who will say, you know what, it's okay, no problem? Some people will say, like, okay, well, if that person who was in your situation, he would have called the police and he wouldn't have let you go. But that's not how we work, right? Our relationships aren't zero-sum games. It's not tit for tat. It's not because you did this to me, I'm going to do this to you. Our relationships are something that are very dynamic, and our most important relationship is the one that I have with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So everything I do, it should be for him. And now, if I'm in a situation where I know that, for example, I won't be able to repair my car, and it's very important for the authorities to get involved, or whatever the situation might be, it is very possible that I can hold this person accountable legally, but not hold him accountable spiritually. Now, in this situation, there's no right, because it was an accident. Obviously, this person didn't hit me on purpose. But sometimes you have situations, for example, where a person runs a red light, he hits a car, and it causes the passenger to die. Right, that passenger could be his wife, that passenger could be his daughter, the husband, whoever the situation might be. So now over here, because there is a spiritual accountability there, this is something now that we have to explore a little bit and say, okay, like what do we do, and how do we deal with this, and how do we how do we deal with that in a stepwise manner? So I think I want to open the floor up a little bit here, because I've given a scenario here where you're driving and your spouse is in the seat next to you. This person runs a red light. Right? You're going through the green light, so you're not at fault at all. The person runs the red light and they hit you, and your spouse dies in that accident. So what are some steps that we can take to deal with that? And what levels of accountability now can I hold the person who has run the red light? Right? Because this isn't a pure accident. And obviously, the person didn't intend to kill anyone. Right? Even Shar'an, he wouldn't be punished with the death penalty, because he never intended to kill anyone. But over here, what are the steps of forgiveness, and what are some things that I can do to kind of consolidate and ameliorate myself? So I don't know how you want to do this, Muhammad.
So now that's a pretty intense question. So here's what I'm gonna do, inshallah. How about, regarding the same question that Sheikh Farhan presented, let's give you 30 seconds of processing it, and then we will open it up for folks to chime in. And once again, please, if you can, no pressure, cut on your cameras so we can, make this as personable as possible, or at least cut on your audio so that you can share your thoughts, inshallah. And after 30 seconds, inshallah, I'll start with responding to the question that Sheikh Farhan presented, inshallah. So reflect on this. It's a very powerful question. May Allah protect us also.
Ameen. Ameen.
Okay, so I'm thinking about I feel like on one hand, I can imagine, I can create like how my response would be if something like that happened. But recognizing that right now I'm detached from the situation because I'm not currently going through it.
That's really important. Absolutely. But I mean, at the same time, I'm pretty sure we can come up with some coping mechanisms. Can you give me a second?
Oh, yeah.
Close my door.
Okay, yeah. Coping mechanisms, yeah. Yeah, that's tough, man. SubhanAllah. So something comes to mind, and you saying that helps me pointing in a direction. So me personally, like when calamity happens to me, I try to internalize it in a way of, what, like internally, like what did I do in terms of like, because I see it as like maybe perhaps Allah is punishing me for something, right? That's how I internalize it myself.
Mm-hmm.
And to kind of look at it like, I try to look at it as a way of like, there must be something that I did that Allah is essentially reciprocating the energy that I put out into the world, and as a way for me to kind of try to rectify how I move forward, kind of type thing,
Okay, so there are a few ways to look at calamities, right? One of them is to look at them as some type of recompense, meaning that there's something that I did, and this is an Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala caused this to happen in order to remove the sins or remove the sin that I had been perpetrating, and that's one viewpoint. The other viewpoint is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is testing me in order to raise my rank, right?
Oh, subhanAllah.
Right, that's another scenario, and that's another situation. So I think it's very important to understand these two, and because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not sitting waiting for us to make a mistake, right? That's not, Allah is not vindictive. He's not vengeful. He's not looking for opportunities to punish us. All right? Our Lord is not petty. He's always giving us opportunities to improve. He's always giving us opportunities to get better, and it's not like, you know what I mean? It's not in a way that Allah is constantly like, oh, got you. No, it doesn't work like that. That's not the relationship that Allah is trying to create, and that's not a relationship that vindictive mindset is something that actually reflects negatively on us. And this is how, if this is how we're viewing Allah, this is something that's really problematic. And obviously, I don't mean to single you out, but I'm just talking about in general. There are a number of people who do have this attitude that, okay, well, if I do this, Allah punish me like this, and we have a very karma like attitude. And this is wrong. It's not necessary. The thing is like, okay, Allah is punishing me by taking another life. There's not, you know what I mean? Like where's the balance there, and where's the test there? The test would be, okay, Allah is causing me to react. This individual who's next to me is a completely independent person, and that person's test is very different.
Interesting. That's a good point.
Right? Really good point. That person's test is very different, and what they're going through is very different. Obviously nobody plans to die, and usually an accident is very sudden, right? And we have no control over it. So there, you have two separate things that are going on. There are two separate tests that are going on. Allah is testing me in my reaction, but He's not going to punish me with someone else, right? I've even heard some parents say that Allah is punishing me through my son or punishing me through my daughter because I did this or I did that. Well, I don't think that's a good mindset to keep. I don't think that our Lord is like I said. I don't think He's petty. I don't think He's vindictive. I don't think He's vengeful, in that He's waiting for us to make opportunities or just take opportunities to troll us. It's not that's not the relationship that I believe Allah is trying to establish with us. So, and the second thing, like I said, is in order to raise our rank. I think that's something that's very important, or to give us a lesson, right? Sometimes there are a number of things that happen around us. So I think it's very go through our lives and look through our lives, and there are many times we'll see like a really bad accident, right? We'll see a really bad accident, on the side of the road, and Allah is showing me that accident for a person, right? Whatever test that person was going through and whatever issues that person is facing, that's obviously between him and Allah. But me as an observer, now what is Allah? Allah is showing me that for a reason. Right? Maybe I've been leaving the house without wearing my seatbelt. Maybe I haven't been taking precautions. Maybe I've been driving recklessly. Right? There's so many things, and Allah gives us daily lessons as reminders to return back to Him. So you can look at them as reminders. You can look at as them for ways to turn back to Him. You can look at them as ways of removing sin, and or as as a sort of karma, in the sense that in order to lessen the punishment of the next world, we receive a portion of that punishment in this one.
So, a question I think could be good in terms of like tying to what the prompt that you gave us.
Is everybody else AFK? Like, what's going on?
So
we could have had this conversation in the library.
No, that's true. That's facts. Yeah, you're right about that. Yeah. So, what are coping mechanisms, or would anyone like to share something how they internalize trauma similar to that? Oh, Tariq, Bismillah. We can't hear you.
Yeah, he's unmuted, but I don't know why we can't hear him.
Uh-oh. We can't hear you yet. Tariq, what are you saying about me, bro? Is it offensive? Be honest. Come on, bro. You gonna do me like that? We're live right now, Akhi, bro.
Is it all good now?
Yeah, we hear you perfectly.
Okay, perfect. Which is the AirPods. So, I don't know how I would react in this situation, like in reality, because it's very hard to put yourself in a situation like that, like we can imagine. But obviously, the trauma that takes the toll on you, and then the emotion is going to be very different than how you can imagine it. So, how I'd like to think I'd handle this situation is something that brings me comfort in a lot of situations. Is that just realizing this moment has been written since the beginning of time, and that the person in the passenger seat, their test is over. And they were meant to their test was meant to end like that. And something that I do, which is not necessarily a good habit, is I tend to internalize blame. So what would have been going through my mind, for example, would be like, what if I made that U-turn, or what if I made that left, or what if I left the house 5 minutes earlier, I hit brake, or I sped up. But just going back to everything was written since the beginning of time, I think that would bring me comfort that there's nothing that I could have done. Even if I decided to stay in that day, the person in the car with me might have decided to go for a drive. Same thing would have happened. The person who hit the car, obviously their intent wasn't to kill. If the situation is that they were completely sober, they were abiding by all the rules of the road.
We said they ran the red light.
Not abiding all the rules of the road. If they were sober, if they had no malintention, I'm assuming they're going to be very sorry and resentful of their actions. So I would try to be forgiving. I would try my best to be forgiving, because I would understand that even though it was their fault for running the red light, they ran that red light for a reason. And that, I don't know, like what brings me comfort is that everything happens for a reason, and that everything is written out. So kind of all my explanations for how I think I would react to that situation kind of goes back to that. So I would think if it wasn't them, it would have been someone else.
All right, so finding solace in the qadr, finding solace in the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had this person's death written. Yeah. And the thing is, I think that's a good way for us to come to peace with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But now this individual, there are a number of reactions that he can have, right? In order for him to get out of the lawsuit, or get out of a potential, insurance issue, what he does is he blames you, and you're not at fault. And he continues to fight you, even though 100% he's wrong. So how would the forgiveness shift in that scenario?
Me personally, I'm a very hot-headed person, and just the emotion running that high in a situation like that, honest to God, I don't know what I would do to the other person. But what I would like to think that I would do, not in that situation, but I would like to think that I pray for them, and for myself, and for my loved one that had passed. Obviously, that's the ideal thing to do. I can't say that's what I would do. But forgiveness in that situation, it would make it a lot harder. Yeah. But I think I would go back to, if it wasn't them, it would have been someone else. And it wasn't necessarily like all their fault, because that moment was written. So if I just kind of I would try and view that person as a pawn in Allah's plan, rather than the deciding fact, like this guy ended my loved one's life. I would try and think of it as he was a pawn in a greater picture.
Okay. Mashi. So I think keeping perspective is a very good takeaway, a very strong takeaway from what you mentioned. And sometimes that perspective can be channeled in a number of ways. The way you channel it is by, putting it back on the qadr, saying, okay, my spouse's life was written to be this much in this situation, and that's what it is. And I think that's very reasonable. I think that's a very good way of dealing with it. Okay, what else? Anyone else? I think Asli's enjoying this class so much she signed in twice, right? Are there two?
Oh, MashaAllah. And then also, something that you said, I'm not sure if it's a quote. You said something to the effect that that forgiveness is a process, not a switch, or something to that effect. And I think that's dope, because I feel like a lot of times, like what you said before, you start off by saying that people kind of want to like some kind of like spiritual blackmailing of you to make you feel like you have to like be like, right now you just chop my hand off and I gotta show you love, like, you know, like
no,
like that.
It doesn't work like that. And a lot of it, you know, and I'll share with you guys a very quick story. And this is the one of Wahshi. Wahshi is the one that's killed Hamza, right? And then after that, he accepted Islam, and he came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The Prophet said, "How did you kill my uncle?" So he said that, you know, your uncle was moving around a lot in battle, and he said, I found an opening and I threw my spear, you know, aiming for his torso, and I hit him. You know, so he hit him in the stomach, and Hamza bled out and he died. So the Prophet ﷺ, he said, please don't come in front of me anymore.
SubhanAllah.
Right, and this is a show of the humanity of the Prophet ﷺ, in that he forgave him. Right, he needed closure to how he was dealing with the death of Hamza. And you're talking about, like, you know, I think there's a couple of years gap between the time that Wahshi accepted Islam and the time that he killed him, or there's some type of time frame. I don't remember exactly, but that time frame the Prophet ﷺ needed in order to forgive this person, to forgive this individual, to forgive this companion. But that forgiveness doesn't necessarily mean that I need to face this person again, or I need to have the same type of relationship again. I think this is something that's really important to remember too. So if I have a friend, for example, that steals from me, and I know he took this money from me, and he comes forward and he's like, listen, I'm really sorry. You know, I saw that $50 and I needed it for this and that. I can forgive him, but am I going to keep my money, or am I going to keep money around him, or am I going to trust him the same way? Or there are sometimes, you know, for example, there are situations where there are certain teachers, right, who might have molested, you know, one of the children in the classroom. Will now that Islamic center, will that school, with that, you know, will they hire him in that same position? Yeah, and you know what I'm saying? These are questions that need to ask, because such people exist, right? Such people exist. You know, there might have been like an inappropriate touching. I remember, and there are a number of situations where you find that how a community reacts to a particular situation, and they force this forgiveness from the person who has been oppressed. That person sometimes leaves Islam, sometimes will leave the community. You know, there are a number of situations where that happens. So I think it was here in the DC area, where there was a girl who was being raped by her uncle. Right, he was being molested. She was being molested by her uncle. So she came forward, and then the community actually turned on the girl, saying, "Oh, you ruined his life. You know, you got him fired from his job, and, you know, now he's in jail. Look at his family, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera."
That's a really interesting that's a really interesting point that you bring up, especially with the story of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, how he forgave this person, but he told him, like, don't come in front of me, as in, like, I don't want to have to, like, face you or deal with you anymore.
Yeah, and he told him why. He said because every time I see you, I remember my uncle.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, every time he sees him, he remembers that that traumatizing event, whatever that may have been, and that can be applied, I think, to just about anything. And that's definitely true with, like, these community scale pressures put on individuals or people who are oppressed in this sense, to just kind of pressure them into forgiving them, and act like nothing ever happened. It's unrealistic to expect anyone
absolutely
to think like that.
No, I mean we're human beings, right? So
yeah,
the how we react to situations, how we deal with situations, how we speak to people, it's going to change. There's going to be a shift in that dynamic. You can't, people feel like, oh, once you forgive someone, you have to act the same way.
Yeah. And just act like nothing happened.
Well, no. That's not. Listen, I can forgive you, meaning that in front of Allah, I'm not going to complain, right? I'm not going to say anything to Allah about what you did to me. But that is going to be the extent of it. We're not going to be friends anymore. I'm not going to hang out with you anymore. I'm not going to spend any more time with you. Like when it comes to us being friends, I'm not dealing with you. And that is completely fine. People, a lot of times people will misconstrue forgiveness with forgetfulness, right? And they'll say, okay, you've completely wiped it away. And is there a level of forgiveness where you can go back to the original way that the original relationship was? Yeah, absolutely. And there are people who have that type of taqwa or awareness, or that that the wronging that happened to them was something that they could completely overlook. And this happened with Abu Bakr, right? This happened with Abu Bakr, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says, ولا يأتي أولو الفضل منكم والسعة أن يؤتوا أولي القربى والمساكين والمهاجرين في سبيل الله وليعفوا وليصفحوا ألا تحبون أن يغفر الله لكم والله غفور رحيم. So this verse was actually revealed concerning Abu Bakr, where he used to give to his nephew, right? He had a nephew named Mistah, and he used to give him money every month, as a stipend to help take care of him. Mistah was one of the people who actually accused Aisha of committing zina. So when Abu Bakr found out, now he's talking about his daughter now. When Abu Bakr found out, he stopped the stipend. He stopped giving him money. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed this ayah where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, those who have been graced with bounty and plenty should not swear that they will no longer give to kinsmen. They will no longer give to their family. The poor, those who emigrated in Allah's way, the muhajirin, let them pardon and forgive. Do you not wish that Allah should forgive you? Allah is most forgiving and merciful. So Abu Bakr, he said, I do want Allah to forgive me. I do want Allah to forgive me. And not only did he return his stipend, he increased it. And this is like the amazing nature of Abu Bakr as a companion, as an individual. And there's a reason that the Prophet ﷺ said about him that you could place him in one side of the the kifa, in the plate, the weighing plate, and you could put the entire ummah in the weighing plate, and he'll outweigh them all. In terms of his iman, his belief, and stuff. So when it comes to those situations, is it possible? Yeah, but I think it depends on the crime, right? It depends on the level of the crime. It depends on whether that person came forward, because because we know Mistah came forward and he apologized, for what he had said and what in saying that it was unjust, and he went back and he returned back what was to him, and and he increased on that. So this is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed that. But then we have the situation, is anybody going to say the Prophet ﷺ has less taqwa or less wara or less awareness than Abu Bakr does? No, absolutely not. And in the way he dealt with Wahshi was very different, right? The way he dealt with Wahshi was very different, because the wronging that was done was of a different level, and the reminder of that was a different level. So I think everybody is different. How everybody processes forgiveness is different. How we deal with it, how we kind of channel it. But again, holding somebody legally accountable doesn't mean that we didn't hold them spiritually accountable. Or holding somebody spiritually accountable doesn't mean that we're not holding them legally accountable. And the last part, and the last thing I wanted to discuss, is that sometimes forgiveness can become a weapon. And what do I mean by that? That sometimes I might wrong someone, or you might wrong someone, and you realize the mistake that you made. You might have scratched their car, you might have done whatever the situation is, and you go and you pay for it, and you clear everything up, and you ask for forgiveness. And this person, now you go to say to the person, like, Akhi or Ya Ukhti, can you please forgive me? And they say no. That's fine. They have every right? Forgiveness is art. Like, we own forgiveness. Like, there's nobody who has a monopoly over forgiveness. Like, but if the forgiveness is in my hand, I have full right over it. I have full right over it. Now, the problem that comes in with this is when I go and I'm seeking forgiveness again, and this is happening a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and the person keeps saying to me, I'm not ready to forgive you yet. This is a problem. Now what we've done is we've held this person hostage, and we've turned our forgiveness into a weapon. This is love. This is complete oppression. If you want to forgive the person, you have to give them an answer, or you give them a time frame. Like, hey, listen, Akhi, come back to me in 2 weeks. Come back to me in a month. Right? Right now, I'm not in a state where I can really process this. I appreciate you coming to see me, but I can't deal with this right now. Come back to me in a couple of weeks. Come back to me in a month. And then after that, you can decide and be like, hey, listen, because of the extent or because of what you did, I can't forgive you. That's it. You have to, there has to be a choice that's made. You can't leave the person hanging. As soon as we leave the people hanging, we have now turned our forgiveness into a weapon. And this is something that is not permissible. And what that person did, so a person might say, okay, well, I sought forgiveness from this person and they're not forgiving me. Then it's upon us as individuals to make dua and to make istighfar. right? These are the two things that we have left. We tried seeking this person's right, and we tried seeking forgiveness from them, and they didn't give it to us. So the only being that we can turn to now is turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we can try revisiting, after a year, after 5 years, after 10 years, whatever the time frame is, every once in a while checking back in, be like, hey, have things changed? But there are some crimes that some people just don't find forgivable. You have murder cases, you have rape cases, right? There are a number of things that happen, or you cause a person to come, you destroyed their business, whatever the situation might be. We have to understand, when it comes to the gravity of situations, these are all going to be very subjective. But you have to own it, right? You have to own it. You have to own the situations. You own the forgiveness. But all of these things need to be dictated. They need to be very clear. So this is just the last few things that I wanted to share, and I wanted to talk about in terms of the misconceptions surrounding forgiveness and what it entails and what it involves. So, Allahu a'lam wa sallallahu ala khayri khalqi nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. You're on mute. Oh, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry about that. So, thank you, Sheikh Farhan. Is there any thoughts, reflections? Perhaps maybe what Sheikh Farhan mentioned might have triggered thoughts that relate to another topic. Perhaps is there something that anyone would like to share regarding how they're feeling right now, or thoughts they might have?
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah.
How's it going?
Oh, okay, I see you, GQ. MashaAllah.
Astaghfirullah. I have a question. So, Imam, I'm from Philly. One of the things that, unfortunately, like a lot of Muslims have to deal with is like abandonment issues with parents. And because parents hold, a specific weight in Islam, forgiveness becomes or at least having that conversation or understanding what your rights and responsibilities are towards your parents. If there is, you have a lot of cases where fathers will leave, but they're still present to some extent. So you still have connection, things like that. What is the responsibility, along these lines of forgiveness and things like that, or not forgiving? And then with parents in particular, you still have people that think they have rights and responsibilities towards their parents still. How do you deal with that situation?
So, I mean, there are a few things, and I think the topic of toxic parents is something that should be addressed separately, completely, because it is a problem. It really is a problem. Even us, we're at a point now where we're parents ourselves, and you will find that toxicity actually drips down. There is a, regardless of how you feel about trickle down theory with the parents, it actually happens where we have levels of toxicity within ourselves, and that actually carries forward in how we address and how we deal with our children. But I don't want to talk about that right now. What I will focus on something that is a little bit more tangible is, number one, understanding what it means to have bir toward our parents, to have obedience toward our parents. And I think that the bir is misunderstood. It is meant to be respect, right? So we have to always respect our parents. I remember there's a brother I know, a very close friend of mine, who was like, my mom used to bring crack into the house. And while he was growing up, and she kept bad company, and she was, she had all these things, and he's like, I cannot forgive her. I can't bring myself to forgive her. She had a really negative influence in my life. Even now, she's constantly asking me for money and this and that. So and I told him, I was like, listen, Akhi, you have to maintain a relationship with her in the sense that maybe she'll come around, maybe she'll seek forgiveness, maybe she'll get clean, get her into a substance abuse center. There are a number of steps that we need to take in order to do that. And it's going to be hard, but for many of us, our advantages is that we know that our parents are our test, right? So, and I don't mean to, to say that like in a negative way, but recognizing what our test is a blessing in and of itself, because Allah, might not have tested us with wealth. He might not have tested us with illness. He might not have tested us, all of us, alhamdulillah, like we're generally healthy. Allah has given us the ability to see, taste, smell. We're all generally healthy. We enjoy exercising or biking or running or tennis or whatever the case might be. There are so many blessings that we have. And if we look at those in the larger scheme of things in context, we'll find that, okay, well, this one part, yeah, it's not, it's not peaches and cream. It's not as nice as I'd want it to be. But even that, we'll find that there are a number of things that we can do in order to deal with that. There was a brother who had called me like in the last couple of weeks saying that my parents want me to become a doctor and I want to go study the sacred sciences. I want to study the shara. He said, am I being disobedient by not listening to them? I said, this isn't a case of disobedience. This is a case of disagreement. And it's completely fine to disagree with your parents. It is not fine to disobey them. Meaning that if there's something that's within my control and it doesn't affect my, overall life decisions and life schemes, then I have to obey them in that, right? People might say, okay, well, you have to obey your parents' slave. If she tells me to kick my son out of the house and he's 12, can I do that? Or if she tells me like, okay, you have to send us 90% of your salary, am I obligated to do those things? No, I mean, none of those things are an obligation because I have my own life, I have my own independence, I have my own spending, etc. Their right comes in terms of I need to be continuously respectful toward them, and I need to make sure that if they're not doing well, that I care for them for within my capacity. So I hope that gives a little bit of perspective on how to deal with parents in that way, because I know sometimes there are parents that are involved, they're not involved, but overall, regardless of how they word toward us, there is a level of respect that does have to be maintained. Meaning that just because my father abandoned me doesn't allow me to curse him, or just because my mother wasn't in the scene, it means that I can abuse her now physically or verbally, or that doesn't give me that right. Do I have to maintain that relationship with them? It depends on the level of abuse, because there are situations where like the father or the mother were molesters, right? And now all of a sudden, oh no, you're still obligated to. No, you're not. Like, I'm sorry that once that line was crossed, okay, yeah, I will. The respect will change in that situation in the sense that I will not curse them, right? It will change in that I will not abuse them, but it's not going to change in the way that, okay, like, yeah, I'm not having a relationship with this person. I've been so scarred, I've been so hurt, and this person crossed a line that a sacred line that should not have been crossed. Like, there are many of us who grew up with verbal abuse, right? Like, our mothers were abusive verbally, our fathers were abusive verbally, but those things they can lead to certain types of trauma for sure, but a lot of times that trauma can be navigated versus physical and sexual abuse. And by physical abuse, I want to be very clear. Physical abuse is an overwhelming reaction to situations. Getting a slap on the face or like that's not abuse. That's more spanking than it is abuse. And spanking is something that's completely reasonable. It's something that's completely legal in all states, regardless of where we are. Abuse is when you didn't do your homework and you get a bat to the back of the head. I mean, that's abuse, and that's absolutely that's not tolerated, religiously or legally. In sexual abuse, there's no, that cannot be tolerated at all. That cannot be tolerated at all. In those two specific situations, the physical abuse, even depending, there are some people who are willing to overlook it. Sexual abuse, it's that one. If a sister or brother came to me and they said to me like this, I would not tell them they have to establish a relationship. I would not tell them that. I would say it's your decision. And if you feel you've gotten to a point where you can, talk to them and discuss with them, that's completely up to you. But other than that, it's not something, again, it's very subjective. Bir, and this is why Allah uses the word bir, because it is subjective. It's not complete obedience. Obedience is to Allah and obedience is to His Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and Allah knows best.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much.
MashaAllah. I see Tariq. We have one more question with Brother Tariq, and then we'll conclude, inshallah. Bismillah.
So I found it interesting, the story you told about the Prophet and the man who killed his uncle and how he forgave him, but he said, don't come in front of me. And I find that, like, in terms of today, it's kind of like a forgive but don't forget type of thing. But then with forgive and don't forget, it's like, I know personally I forgave this person 100%, no bad blood, all that. But then to the outside world or the other people or maybe the person who I'm forgiving, it seems like I'm holding a grudge against them because of that don't forget part, in that people think there's still a little bit of resentment or even I have a vendetta against this person. So how do you kind of navigate that forgive but don't forget?
I mean, that's between you and Allah, right? That's all the forgiveness is. If I tell someone I forgive them, but I don't forget, like, dude, like, why you keep hiding your wallet from me? Well, so because you stole from me, bro. Like, I'm not. I'm just keeping it 100.
Bro, it's just a dollar, bro. You don't gotta hold that against me, man.
Right. No, you don't have to hold that again. It's okay, man. Just put your wallet out. Why? No, I'm not. Listen, I'm not stupid, right? And the thing is, it has nothing to do with resentment. I don't need to prove to you that I'm not resenting you. I don't need to prove to you that I'm not holding a grudge. I've told you. I said that, listen, I'm not going to hold you accountable in front of Allah. But you have to understand also that the nature of our relationship will change. Listen, if somebody has stolen, somebody is abusive, somebody, you know what I mean? In all of those situations, the reason that I don't put myself in similar situations is not because of me. It's because I don't want to test that person, right? Some people are tested in different ways. Some people are tested with money. Some people are tested with wealth. Some people are tested with women, and like, for example, there's a brother I knew. Every time he came around, like he'd be hitting on my sister. So so I would stop bringing him around and I'd be like, okay, this is not working. This is not going to continue. It's like, yo, like, what's good? Like, what happened? Blah, blah. I was like, yeah, I don't appreciate the way you act around my sister. So it didn't make sense for me to keep bringing you around the house. I was like, we're cool. We're friends. We'll hang out. We'll still play ball or whatever, but you're not coming around my house. So it's like, oh, why you got to be like that, blah, blah. He's like, I don't know, maybe I'm salty. Well, you could, you could
stop hollering at my sister.
And the thing is, listen, I don't. Again, even you're hollering at my sister. There's a way to do it, right? There's a way to do it. Like this is not the way, and I'm not going to tolerate that. If you're serious. If you're serious, then sit down. Let's go. Let's talk about it and tell me what your plan is. Tell me how you want to move forward. Tell me, like it's not that it's not happening. Like this way is not happening. This way is not continuing. But it's setting boundaries and defining them. It's more to protect that person from falling into the same mistake or falling into the same sin, and that's something that's really important. We don't want people to be tested with something that they've clearly been tested with before. Like, for example, if and this is something that unfortunately is more common than it should be, the Quran teachers who molest the kids, right? And this is something a lot of people don't want to talk about, but it happens. Now, this is the only skill set that this person has, right? And he's been caught touching kids inappropriately. Do you want to put him back in a classroom with kids? But he still needs livelihood, right? Can I put him in a factory, to make license plate or sew clothes and stuff like that? Yeah, absolutely. I have no issue doing that. Why? Because I'm not testing him with the same fitna. I'm not testing him with the same problem. You want to remove people who have problems with certain things out of those environments. Even the Prophet ﷺ, initially he forbade the companions even from drinking from containers that were known to hold liquor. Right? So like wine bottles and whiskey bottles and these type of things. He's like, you can't drink from them. You can't drink from them, even regular drinks, not just whiskey. You can't not just the alcohol. You can't drink regular drinks from them. And the reason for that is because you're talking about an entire nation that had a substance abuse problem, and he didn't even want them to go near any of those things or be in situations where they would be tempted to drink again. If it would have been enough for him to have said, okay, no, you guys need to stop drinking, and that's it, period. But all of the means that would even lead to that, anything that would remind them of that, he sallallahu alaihi wasallam would always try to get them out of that situation.
A follow-up question I have would be, how does this translate into self-forgiveness and forgiveness from Allah? Like, for example, if I committed a sin, and navigating forgiving myself, but not forgetting, and in terms of Allah, obviously Allah is the most forgiving, but there's still that won't forget. I think I heard in a khutbah before that if your sins are forgiven, which inshallah they will be brought up again on Yawm al-Qiyamah. You won't be punished for them or tried for them necessarily, but they will still be brought up.
I mean, the thing is, that's for Allah to decide. If Allah wills, He can completely overlook every sin that you've done and enter you into His paradise. If He wants, He can just hold you accountable for one sin that was devastating and throw you into the hellfire. That's completely up to His discretion. Walaikum salam. So that is completely up to Allah's discretion. It's not for me to decide, what is Allah going to accept and what is He going to reject, right? That's completely up to His discretion. But in terms of how to deal with sin in this world and how to deal with wronging in this world, seeking forgiveness from the person who we've wronged, that's always going to be the first step. The follow-up step is always going to be seeking forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the way to do that is by making active dua, by making extra good deeds, by constantly making istighfar. And a person will be like, okay, until what point? When do I stop doing that? When do I know, or when do I know that sin has been forgiven? When your conscience stops bothering you about it. Right, so there are two things that'll happen. Either your conscience will stop bothering you about it because you've become engrossed in sin, right? And that's something that happens where you just kind of silence out your conscience. But that's because you're doing so many bad things and you're doing so many bad deeds that amongst the sea of bad deeds, that one isn't going to stick out particularly. The other way of doing it is by engrossing ourselves in good deeds, right? Because if we're constantly enveloping ourselves and surrounding ourselves in good deeds, there will come a point where we get that we get that tama'nin, we get that softness and tranquility of the heart, where we feel that, man, I've done enough now, where I feel Allah has forgiven me. Right? It's not a surefire thing, but at least that it's a very strong indicator that inshallah that particular sin that has been bothering you has been forgiven, and Allah knows best.
Alhamdulillah, everyone.
Jazakallah.
I mean,
I want to definitely thank all of you for coming out. This is a weekly program, and also we got to thank our brother, mashallah, Sheikh Farhan, for sharing his views, his perspectives, his truth. Now, with that being said, so it's interesting. There was a talk about relationships because the next talk that Sheikh Farhan will be giving, inshallah, in this series, will be dealing with. The title of the topic is, I'm not sure if you guys are ready for this. You know what I'm saying? This might be like, let me see if y'all ready for this real quick. And I promise you, we're not going to be here much longer. He's going to be talking about dating, how to become chosen, and how to choose, halal style.
Allahu Akbar.
So,
yeah, that one's going to be hot, bro.
That's going to be hot fire right there. And I want to say this. Like he said, Don't come to don't be hollering at my sister, bro. Like, come on, bro.
If you will do it right, do it right.
Do it right, bro. Come on, dog.
No, I mean, listen. I appreciate the game. You know what I mean? Like, everybody's out on the hunt, but
true.
Come on, you got to hunt properly, Akhi. Don't come out of season. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for real. And I'm thinking for this particular discussion, we should probably do it in not publicly. It'll be like a meeting, inshallah.
Yeah.
So that people can feel comfortable talking. Otherwise, we're not gonna be able to have, you're not gonna hear me say anything. But anyway, with that being said, we thank y'all for coming out, inshallah. Next week we have me and Saira will be facilitating, and basically what we're gonna do are recaps and check-ins, basically unpacking some of the content that was discussed in the previous week and weeks, and then also talking about things that people are going through for that particular session. For our sessions are check-ins and recaps. And then, of course, we have Brother Saif Rahman, who will be covering love, life, and this is tied specifically to the Prophet ﷺ. Love, life, as seen through the life of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, gender roles as seen through the life of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and last and not least,
how many genders though?
We're gonna go over all of those, bro. Inshallah. And the last one, say it loud, I'm Muslim and I'm proud. And then of course, my wife Lauren Schreiber will be facilitating a session, and it's very ambiguous. But the first part dealing with self, the second part dealing with companions, and the last part dealing with God. Each week is a different theme. Be sure to come through, inshallah. This should be hot fire. I can't wait for the dating discussion. I know that's gonna be. We're gonna have to do a private meeting for that joint, man. Because
I don't know if Zoom might hit its limit.
Yeah, you feel me though. You feel me? So with that being said, alhamdulillah, I'll pass it back to Sheikh Farhan to close out, and we'll see you all inshallah next week, inshallah.
Jazakumullah khair. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless all of those who have come here today. If there is any good in this discussion, then it is from Allah. And if there was anything wrong or mistaken, that it is for shaitan and myself. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless everyone here and to bless their families. Jazakumullah khair. وصلى الله على خير خلق نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك وأشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. See you next week, inshallah. Let people know. Definitely enjoy everyone's participation. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Wa alaikum salam. I'll see you, Sheikh.
Alaikum salam.